Hello, welcome to Life in the Suburbs with Sharon. I am Sharon Loudenbach. I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a resident of White Marsh Township, and I'm a real estate agent with Compass Real Estate in the Philadelphia suburbs, especially the Eastern Montgomery County section of Philadelphia. I started this podcast a couple months ago already. I think this is number 13. So I started this podcast after realizing that I've lived in the suburbs my entire life. I've been selling real estate now in the suburbs for 10 years, and I've met such amazing people and realized that there's so many great people and businesses to speak to and bring to the listeners of this podcast. So that's really where it all stemmed from. Uh, a little tidbit real quick of realtor wisdom. Today I'm going to talk about your lender pre-approval letter. Uh, Being that the market is still really, really challenging for buyers, I'm going to make sure that you realize that if you have a pre-approval in writing from a lender that's more than really now in this world 2 or 3 months old, you want to call your lender back and you want to get a fresh pre-approval. The fact that the rates are constantly changing, you really need to stay on top of that pre-approval, the process, because things can change very, very quickly as to your ability to buy a home. So just make sure that you reach out to your lender every 2 or 3 months. They expect you to. They probably are already reaching back out to you, but make sure that you do that and keep your pre-approval letter ready. So when that perfect house comes along, you can buy it. All right, we're going to move into our guest today. We are with Randi Rubin today.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, I'm just realizing that you're like on top of me instead of to the left or right of me on my screen. That's kind of different. And happy Valentine's Day to everybody. But anyway, Randi Rubin, let me just get her background out. She is a partner at Royer Cooper Cohen Braunfeld LLC. That is a law firm. Randi practices law in the fields of family law and divorce, serving the Philadelphia metro area. So Randi raised her family just like I did in Lafayette Hill, and now she resides in Conshohocken Borough, right in the heart of it all. How do we even know each other? Friends of friends. I think we got to know each other in college, maybe through parties or
Mutual friends, our
mutual
parents,
friends. So
I
that's
think
what
there's
it is. So
five
I,
different connections along the way.
yeah, I know we could probably put that together. Yeah, we're gonna tag a couple of them here today, maybe. So anyway, start by sharing with our listeners a little bit about you. Tell us about how you got started as an attorney. I know you didn't go straight to law school after Penn State undergrad, so tell us more.
So I've been practicing going into my 26th year as a attorney. I took actually 5 years off between college and law school. I've always wanted to be a lawyer since elementary school. In fact, in my yearbook and from elementary school, it says I was going to be a lawyer on the Supreme Court. That's what it said.
Wow.
And shockingly, I'm not a lawyer on the Supreme Court as we sit here today. However, I did get into law first as a paralegal. And when I finished Penn State, I went to paralegal school
Mhm.
and ended up moving out to California with the hope of going to law school out in California. And well, I ended up going to Temple Law. So, but I took 5 years off. I was a paralegal at Cozen and O'Connor for a few years. I worked for an insurance company for a few years and really felt that I wanted to look before I leapt into law. And I figured being a paralegal would give me an understanding of the practice of law, what it was like, and also working in an insurance company. I kind of saw law from a business perspective.
Mhm.
And I ended up going to law school, contrary to one of my mentors' suggestion that I not be a lawyer. Um,
Really?
yeah, one of my former mentor, well, he's still a mentor, but
Former
he's
mentors.
not really a former mentor. He's a mentor still. But he had suggested that perhaps I not go to law school. And I didn't listen to him, which is typical of my personality. If somebody says, don't do something, and I end up doing it. But I ended up going to law school 5 years after which I thought really gave me a lot of maturity as a law student.
Yeah.
And even as a practitioner, I felt that I had worked and had work experience and knew something about law, of the business of law. And I think that gave me a little bit of an advantage going
Mhm.
into practicing, and even being a paralegal. I felt that that gave me a little bit of an edge above some of my other compadres that were, young lawyers like myself. And I started out at a large firm in Philadelphia. I was there for 23 and a half years. I didn't
Firm
start
was
out,
that? Are we allowed to share that?
well, yes, I was at Claire Harrison for
Claire Harrison. Yeah.
23 and a half years. And I've been here at my current firm just shy of 2 years.
Mm.
I practiced in commercial litigation for the first 7 years of my practice. And then I went in-house with a company. And then I came back to practicing law, and I didn't want to do commercial litigation. And I was doing real estate and finance, working at Claire Harrison. And then the real estate market changed, and I was a new mother. My kids were still young, 4 and 6. And found myself separating and
Mm.
looking at divorce. And at the time, the then managing partner, Bill Harvey, said to me, "Why don't you work on some family law cases?" And I'm like, okay. And he said, "Or you could go back to commercial litigation." And I said, "Oh, I'd rather have root canal than go back to commercial litigation," because it was a lot of travel. And family law this was entrepreneurial for me. And that was pretty exciting to be able to build something from scratch and work with
They
Bill.
already have that family law department at
No, no, they did not have a family law department.
really?
And luckily, some of my clients were my first clients were all real estate clients, because as the real estate market was going down, some of those would rather get out of their marriages while their assets were down.
Oh
So it
God.
it was a very easy transition for me. And also, I knew about their businesses, which was kind of interesting, just coming from out of real estate and finance, going into family law. I had some business acumen that maybe some of the other family law practitioners didn't, from actually doing real estate transactional work and doing commercial litigation. And it grew from there. And then my former colleague, David Stearman, joined Claire Harrison with his team of people. And we worked together for almost 12 years. And then I joined RCCB in May of 2022. And now our practice group, RCCB, is 3 full-time lawyers: Kim Dudek, Caitlin Mazer, and our 2 paralegals and our admin. And it's like a flourishing practice group here, which is really exciting.
Okay. We went, I want to go back a minute.
Okay.
I want to go back a second before we start getting into exactly like family law and blah, blah, blah. My husband's a lawyer. He did take 1 year off between undergrad and law school, but
Mhm.
5 years is sort of like not your typical, right? I'm not saying it's completely unusual for grad school, but how did you feel? I mean, I feel like a lot of generations are listening to this podcast, especially our children's generation is
Sure.
listening to us. So just talk about that for a second. Like life isn't over once you take your first or your second job. You can pivot, right?
Well, I think that defines my career, is pivoting. I think I graduated in 1990. I didn't go to law school till 1995.
Yeah.
I changed my practice area, 7 years into being a lawyer. And then I changed again 3 years later. And, here I am at 25 years being a lawyer. I think that young people should never feel that they are bound by a set of parameters.
Mhm.
I think that there has to be a lot of passion in what you do and figuring that out. And I think that that takes time. And I think that the 20s are kind of like this, mountain and molehills of figuring out what you like and where your passion is. I mean, certainly there's certain people out there that know exactly what they want to do, and that's their trajectory and that's the path they follow. I think that is um, something that is too ingrained. And I think that we as parents should encourage our kids to try different things and figure out what they love and not feel like they're set, need to fall into what the norm does. It's okay to go in the different direction is really what I'm saying. And for me, pivoting, like you started to ask me, is really been a huge part of my career and how I got to where I am now, is just not being afraid. And I think fear is what holds people
Mhm.
back a lot
So,
in young people particularly, and
y-
old people,
well,
but
yeah. So, like, this seems to be a repeat conversation on these podcasts, and I have to start taking note of this. But so it's not just for young people either. I mean, you knew I had an identity of myself for over 20 years in a family business. And I had that pivot 23 years into my adult life, my
right.
life. So it's not just when you're young. And it's a huge lesson to be learned for so many people, that it's okay as long as you take a couple minutes or years or months or whatever, and really digest it and really discover a lot about yourself that's going to make the pivot hopefully a positive one.
Well, the one thing that comes to mind for me is when I was in law school, one of my law school classmates was in his 70s and had been a doctor his entire life
Wow.
and decided to go to law school later
Oh,
in life and wanted to practice, even though he was like in his 70s. I just think that people have to be more fearless in trying to pursue things to figure out where they fit, where what works for them. And
great lesson.
I think that fearlessness is something that has carried me a lot in my career. Is
So
not
I
being
think
afraid.
carried you in more than just your career. So let's use this segue to the fact that you and your ex-husband decided to separate and divorce. And that's a huge pivot, right? That's like a big ass pivot.
It's a major, major change. We were married for 10 years. We were together for 5 and before we got married. And our children were 4 and 6 when we separated. And I think that I had more conviction at the time of the separation than he did. I think self-awareness was, we had very different perspectives of where things were. And, I think that the first year of separation was hard. I think that it's probably the hardest part of any divorce because you're not only dealing with your own emotions and the changes in your own personal life, but you have these two, you have these children
Mhm. Yeah.
and they didn't ask for this.
Hmm.
They see you both still as their family. You're still a unit to them. You're still a mother, you're still a father. And, I think for me at the time, I was not a divorce lawyer. So I didn't have the same perspective, perhaps, that I do now. But I do know that my mother, who passed away 6 years ago this month, when I told her I was getting divorced, she said, "You can get divorced, but we are not getting divorced," meaning the extended family. My in laws, my parents really had a lovely relationship. My in laws, my parents, and David and I really had great relationships with each other. And it was my mom's conviction and mission to make
Mm.
sure that A, our children were the least affected as possible, and B, that our families remained families and not became, you know, the Hatfields and the McCoys, because that can happen. And I'm not saying that we were perfect. There were moments of contention, there were moments of tension, there were moments of, times where, we were not like we are now, but we were never enemies. We always kept the focus on the children.
Yeah.
And being child focused, I think was the lesson my mother emphasized and the message I got, and the message that that David got, and we figured it out. I think, sometimes in my business, I have divorces that can go on, for years. I mean,
Yeah.
we try to settle these things early on, but the longer your divorces go on, the more likely it is that that relationship for your future will never get to be repaired. And I say that to a lot of people because there is something greater than the financial impact here, and that is the lives of your children. And I think that from David and I both, once we got the economics. Now, we were separated for 10 months before we ever filed for divorce. We were leaving the door open of possibilities of whether maybe we could work things out. But the reality is when we realized we were not going to work it out, and I filed for divorce 10 months later, our divorce was over in 5 months.
Mm.
And it was over in 5 months because we both realized that there was something we had to leave on the table to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed in the house. He moved out.
Yeah.
He didn't know if I could afford to stay in the house. Neither did I. But, we figured that out, and we wanted the stability for our children. And we also didn't feel that time was the measurement. Like, we deal with a lot in custody and people wanting 50-50, and I know that's the law, generally speaking, but it's not always the right move at the time you divorce or separate, because your kids are going through an adjustment. Some people do nesting where both parties are still
Yeah.
staying in the house to keep the kids stable.
So,
So
just to be a little selfish here, there's a lot of divorce that brings in the real estate agent. So, ironically, you did send me a client a couple of years back,
yes,
now a neighbor of mine, which is wonderful. Um, but I deal with a lot of families going through divorce, even in a really tight real estate market like we're in today. There's two things that are still going to happen all the time, and it's death and divorce. So it creates all this, and I feel like, as you do, that though they should also have a therapist, that we're also their therapist.
yes, we wear many hats.
Like you and I could talk for hours on end about our clients, your clients, in relation to my clients going through divorce. It's just it creates a lot of, potential movement, or like you say, non-movement, or only one party is moving, or sometimes they're both moving and rent. It's do you have like a first recommendation for families, or is it just every single situation is completely unique?
I think it's very factually specific. I
Mm.
think that, you know, depending on the reason for the divorce. I mean, in my situation, I didn't have, deception or money being blown on gambling, or, I didn't have kind of the distrust issues that generally can come along with a divorce, whether it's infidelity, somebody, invested in some crazy business and blew all their money, or somebody can't hold down a job, or, whatever the case may be, there wasn't the same distrust. And I think, there's a couple things that drive how things go. Number one is ego. I
Yeah.
mean, ego plays such a huge role in how parties conduct themselves in divorce, because the reality is that when a marriage breaks up, it
Mhm.
represents a failure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
it's a failure of a relationship. But see, I don't look at it, in my situation, I don't look at it as a failure, because I look to my children and see these people that we made together, and notwithstanding that we were not a great husband and wife, or that we could not repair that relationship, we had this ability to be good mother and father, and to not allow our egos to to get involved with how we parent, the business of parenting.
Mhm.
And that is, to me, something, one of the bigger factors about divorce is the ego piece. And then the other factor is whether there's a lot of distrust. Because for me, if I have a case, I get a new case, I want to look to an early resolution. I want to look to a way to keep them out of court. And you know, a lot of divorce cases do end up settling. Some not as quickly as others, but judges don't want to tell you
I
how to
know.
share your children or how to divide your money. They want you to figure
Yeah.
it out yourselves.
Yeah.
But I do think that my perspective is I don't, show my fangs or become a pit bull until I have to. I know that there's
But I
these.
know you become one. But I know I've heard through the grapevine you become one.
Well, we all have different, as we said, different hats for different occasions. And at the outset, I want to have practical solutions. I want to figure things out. I want to try and move
Yeah.
people towards, resolution. And there's also alternative dispute resolution. Not every case has to go to court. There's mediation, there's arbitration, there's collaborative divorce. I think that a lot of people automatically think that it's the War of the Roses at the outset. And I think sometimes people need to just take a breath and, think about where their priorities are for
Yeah.
where they're going to go with this new life of theirs. And, another mentor of mine who recently passed away, would always say to me, somebody leaves something on the table all the time. That's how you get to settlement. There has to be compromise because you can't, not everybody's right 100%.
Exactly the same thing in real estate. I mean, I picked up some saying like yeah, the best result of a negotiation is everybody being slightly upset.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Everybody leaving this a small thing on the table, and that's the best outcome to any negotiation.
Yes. And also it really depends on where the parties' roles are. I mean, traditionally now in today's society, you have two parents that are working,
Yeah.
primarily full time. These traditional roles of somebody being at home and not working, those are minority, okay? But those minority and those disparities between parties' incomes and lifestyles,
Yeah.
I like to say to my clients who have been successful in their careers and or financially have the ability to earn money, there's this analysis that they're going to recoup that money over time. What they may have to pay to their former spouse in alimony, they're going to make that money back. And by the way, if they want to really fight it, they're going to end up paying me
I
or
know.
the or other, the attorneys or forensic accountants when they could get to the resolution a lot quicker. So, obviously facts are very specific to each case.
Ego is the biggest problem, but we're going to move on. We're not going to, ego
Yes, my
clearly
shrink hat is
the
Becky.
biggest problem. But I know you are super passionate about talking about co-parenting. I think that, I know you and David and the kids well enough to know that you have absolutely done a great job. And I think you have a lot to share. So I wanted to sort of just throw it out there, open up the floor. And I don't know if you speak at seminars. I don't know, how you share it, but I know you're passionate about it. So I know that there's some stuff that you can share with us.
So I haven't done seminars on co-parenting. A while back, I had gone to a course to become a parenting coordinator, and then the law had changed and they weren't using parenting coordinators. Now the parenting coordinators are back, and parenting coordinators are lawyers or mental health professionals that are trained to help parents make decisions to keep their cases out of court when it comes to certain
Okay.
activities that your kids should do, or whether they should go to overnight camp or day camp, or, what kind of sports, how many activities should they be involved in any given semester? Because we live in this world where we have overscheduled
That
children.
could create divorce alone, just trying to figure out the schedule.
Well, yeah, yes, absolutely. So from my perspective, and what I always tried to do, and David and I, notwithstanding our great relationship, we did not have a 50-50 custody arrangement. I had primary custody, but my house was open to him.
Mm.
And he could come into my house and he didn't have to knock on the door, and he could go into my candy drawer and pull out string licorice and start eating whatever he wanted. And there was not that barrier. I think that, look, not everybody can be like that. But what I always say is that I think you have to, number one, be child focused. Um, and try to come up with a schedule that really works for your children. If your children have special needs or ADHD and they can't go back and forth between homes every week,
Yeah.
think about that. Consider that in your custody decision. I know sometimes courts will, or they'll fashion it in a
Mhm.
way that is going to make more sense. But I always say to clients, why put the destiny of your children, the lives of your children, in the hands of a third party who
Yeah.
doesn't know you, doesn't know your spouse, doesn't know your children? Have control over your outcome. And if that means trying a schedule that maybe your spouse wants for a period of time to try and be flexible, do it, try it, be experimental. Nothing, when you come out of being an intact family, this idea of two homes, is hard for everybody involved. And depending on the ages of your kids, look, if you have older kids that are 15 and above, why are you going to put them through telling them where they have to go and what they have to do? If they're socially well adjusted, let them continue with that. If
Yeah.
if one spouse is living out of the district, like David lived in Blueville for a period of time. And as my kids got older, they, would talk to their dad and say, I kind of just want to, I'll have dinner with you, but I don't want to stay over. I have plans with my friends. And
The friends. Yeah, it's the friends.
and this is what I say about ego. Like, this is time does not measure the respect, love, or relationship that you have with children. Because there's plenty of parents that are intact families that are sitting there ignoring their kids, 5 out of 7 days a week.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I will say this though, I think that being child focused is really important.
Mhm.
The way you communicate with your spouse is really important. And a lot of times, a lot of spouses, once they get separated and divorced, they're not talking. I mean, some are, but a lot of people are texting and emailing, and they have programs out there. Our Family Wizard,
I've heard of
Talking
those.
Points. There's a couple different software programs out there. Think about what you say before you say it. And like, if you get a message from
Mhm.
your spouse that says something derogatory, don't react. Be less reactive and actually take a step away. Like, I'm not saying don't respond for a week. I'm saying be responsive within, 24 hours. Make them show respect for the co-parenting relationship. But when you communicate like you were talking to your coworker or your boss. Communicate
Mm.
factually, constructively, without criticism.
Non-emotionally.
Well, you just took the words out of my
Oh,
mouth.
sorry.
No, it's okay, but remove that emotion, because I think sometimes there is no tone in text messages and emails,
Oh, yeah.
but tone can be taken. And once it's in writing, here comes the litigator hat. Once it's in writing, you can't take it back.
Right.
That all of a sudden, I mean, nowadays, and I use this all the time, I mean, text messages, emails, a lot of cases in
Yeah.
custody are can turn on the way people communicate with each other, because it's a factor in the custody analysis. If you're a high conflict case and you're constantly fighting and you're constantly well, what a great, try and be a good parent, or calling people names in text messages is really bad. It's bad for the co-parenting relationship. And by the way, doing so in front of your children
Yeah.
is really bad. You
I
know,
hate to, I'm going to have to cut you off. You told
yeah,
me I was allowed to cut you off
yes.
because we are going to start running out of time, but we still have a couple minutes, but I want to finish a
Okay.
couple things. I think this is a great opportunity for you to tell people how they could reach out to you if they have any questions. Not that you're going to get bombarded, but if they want to reach out, how would people find you?
So you can look at the rccblaw.com website. My email address is rrubin@rccblaw.com.
Say the R's and the B's and
Yes, Royer Cooper, Cohen Braunfeld.
yeah.
Yes, yes. And I mean, here's the note I want to leave people with. I'm empowering these parents. I'm empowering them to do better for their children, and to be better for them. Because guess what? Those little minds, no matter how young they are, they're sponges. They feel it, they sense the tension. And then all of a sudden, you've got kids that are having trouble in their own relationships because they see and are learning from what their parents do. So I think parents owe it to their children
Yeah.
to be better.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for all that. Before we go though, because it's now this is a segment that I happen to like, and hopefully my listeners like. It's called Time to Turn the Tables, where my guest gets to ask me a question of their choice. So I hope that you're prepared for that.
Well, I mean, I guess the biggest question I would have that, how do you deal with divorce clients who have a lot of acrimony? Like, what is your strategy for how you deal with them in having to show a house, list a house, negotiate an offer?
Um, Negotiating is always going to be, definitely more difficult because you're dealing with two separate parties. It's hard anyway in a married couple, so that's definitely more complicated. Honestly, Randy, it sounds like our language is very, very similar. I didn't take enough psych courses in college. I really wish I took more. But I think I absorb what I can. I listen to podcasts when I can. I try to, read, etc. I just try to do the right thing when trying to help them in their process. It's definitely every case is so every client is so uniquely different in these situations. I find myself talking a lot to the client in terms of, oh, and when you speak to your lawyer, ba, 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 ba.
Yes.
So it's just a lot of additional communication, a little bit more hand holding for sure.
Do you
Um,
think that the transparency, like, do you think that you get more mileage from the parties when there's, um, like all the communication is to them together and
yeah,
doing
yeah.
everything
So yeah,
transparent?
I mean, texting is a godsend, right? So I
Mhm.
can text or email both of them together and keep everybody on the same page without it getting emotional,
Yeah,
which is really what I have to do because I have to be transactional at some point.
sure.
So as much as I love to help people and I have a big heart with all that, I have to be transactional. And when you get into those situations, you tend to be a lot more transactional. So just being able to text and email in today's world, I can't imagine what it was like being a realtor more than 10, 15 years ago without all of these things that we can use for communication. So I'm fortunate, but it was a great question. And thank you so much for all of your, there's so much more to cover, but I do try to keep these podcasts like under 35 minutes so people don't
That's
get too
great. I'm
horribly
grateful.
bored.
Thank you so much.
So it was great. It was awesome. For all of you out there, if you want to find more, my podcasts are all on my YouTube channel, Life in the Suburbs with Sharon. So please subscribe and follow along there and reach me otherwise. You can find me on all social channels under Sharon Loudenbach. And thank you again to Randi Rubin. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Appreciate it
Yeah.
so much.
See everybody else soon. Take care.
Okay, bye.